proud Pacific climate warrior from the beautiful island of Samoa. I stand here before you because of the land that my ancestors protected yesterday and the land that I hope to protect for my descendants tomorrow. The climate crisis is the biggest threat to my land and the biggest threat to our common home. All around the world, we've seen extreme weather, we've seen drought, we've seen floods, we've seen cyclones, typhoons, all sorts of climate-exacerbated weather events. These alarming realities have pushed a wave of young people to strike, to protest, to petition their governments, and to make sure that they are dedicated to ringing the alarm so that the world knows we are in a crisis. The climate conversation has never been so lively and loud. But we can't speak about climate change without speaking about those who are most affected by it, the Pacific Islands. While other countries can speak of their 3, 5, 10-year climate projections, the Pacific Islands worry about their now. We worry about our land today. Everything we are as Pacific people is connected to our land. Myself, as being a Samoan, I know this firsthand. Our Siva Samoa mimics the way that our land moves, the way that the ocean brushes against the sand, the way that the wind changes direction, and the way that the birds fly through the sky. Our tatau is traditionally known to be made out of the ink, made out of the soot of the land to make the ink. And it is thought of that when you are being tatau, you are being tattooed, that you are now literally carrying your land within your blood. When we welcome those who come to visit our land, we offer them ava or kava. And it is believed that when you drink this kava, you are accepting and you are experiencing all the gifts that our land has to offer. We are a people that is so deeply connected to our land, and everything we are is rooted in this. So when we talk about climate change, we are talking about the risk of losing everything that we are. We are the faces of those who are most affected by it. But we are also the faces of those who have shown resilience despite of it. There's a much bigger untold story here in the Pacific, the untold stories of resilience, and I hope to offer some of these stories for you to think about here today. Just 2 months ago, Kiribati experienced their highest ever king tide, record-breaking projections. There was a lot of discussion online about the worry that people had for Kiribati, but not many people actually talked about how much worse it could have been if the communities hadn't prepared to adapt to these effects. One of my elders in the movement, Mama Pele, who's in this photo, she's been fighting climate change for almost 20 years. She has personally built seawalls, replanted mangroves to protect her coast. Her and her community group know firsthand the way that their island is and the way that the environment interacts. So they know when there's a break in this coastal armor or when there's an opening and how exactly to fix this. They are very familiar with climate change because they live in the realities, and yet they are still so resilient to these effects. I've never once heard Mama Bill ever talk about leaving Kiribati, but instead I have heard about her dreams. Her dreams to build the world's most resilient village, to have floating fales, solar panels, all sorts of renewable energy and clean water sources for her family and her community. She dreams of being another community organizer in this world that is able to marry traditional knowledge with science and technology. But Kiribati isn't the only island that is showing resilience. Tokelau is another climate resilience champ, the first country in the world to be run off 100% renewable energy. An island so small that they contribute to less than 0% to the world's global emissions, but yet they are suffering the effects of its harshest consequences. Tokelau is experiencing now a big issue with soil salination. Because they're a low-lying atoll, a lot of salt water is seeping through their soil, and families have found it hard to grow their usual crops because of how much salt there is in their soil. But luckily for them, young, resourceful, and innovative Tokelauans have found a way to adapt to this effect. They have adapted and adopted a method of farming from Africa and brought it to Tokelau. This method of farming is called Kiho gardens, which are elevated gardens with its own feeding system. So together as a community, they were able to consult with elders and find out what materials in their island they're able to use instead of the materials that they can no longer find on their tropical island because, while the original materials were from Africa. But their elders knew exactly what to use. So one of the examples is that instead of using this special type of wood, they use coconut husks. So they've adopted and they've adapted this technique, and they were able to duplicate these methods all around to different villages, and now families have found a way to grow crops now in the face of climate change. These gardens are now being replicated in Samoa, Fiji, and next year they will start in Mama Pele's village in Kiribati. All around the Pacific, we'll find communities rising up and showing resilience. In the Marshall Islands, harvesting giant clams is a major source of income for their families. But climate change-induced ocean acidification has made it hard for the clams to gather and maintain their calcium carbonate shells. But through aquaculture, a group belonging to the Marshall Islands Marine Resources Authority have been able to spawn their local species of clams to replenish this dwindling population. The elders were able to tell this group where exactly they should be putting these clams and where they should be finding them. So they're able to take these clams, cultivate them, make sure that they're grown and more resilient when they are then put back into the ocean as adults. So that when they're in the ocean, they themselves have more resilience to the changing environment of their seas. Giant clams are very important to the community in Marshall Islands, not only for what they provide for their people, but for what they provide for the moana. Because when these clams go back into the ocean, they act as well as an overall friend and supporter of the other beings that are in this ecosystem that contribute to a healthy moana. In Samoa, the organization Spread, so that's my home, have been running an ongoing project of increasing community resilience to natural disasters by combining traditional knowledge on weather and climate with modern forecasting techniques. So they are now able to bridge this communication gap between Met services and communities, so that the communities are actually able to read what the Met services are giving them in not so much scientific language, but now in a language that they understand. So one of the resources that this project was able to create is the calendar I have behind me. This is another example of how Pacific Islands have shown resilience, but yet they aren't the stories that you see on the news. Now I can go on and on about more and more stories because there are so many out there. In fact, so many people out there showing climate resilience that don't know that they're showing climate resilience because they're just simply trying to survive. Stories that are often left out of this specific climate change conversation. So as the world recognizes that we are in a crisis, let's remind ourselves that the answers and methods of adapting to this problem doesn't just lie in the science and the technology. A lot of these answers lie within our indigenous communities. So let us remind ourselves that we need to talk to, consult, and value traditional knowledge, value indigenous communities, because our indigenous communities are the ones who have lived with our land, who know how to live symbiotically with this land, and they have done so centuries before this period of destruction. But most of all, we need to stop this destruction now. We need to move away from the era of fossil fuels and move into renewable energy, because frankly, our future depends on it. Because I truly believe that if we can save the Pacific, we can save the world. Have a lovely day.